Well, another one of our artists that's been coming here for years, and a good friend of mine, I've been knowing her for many, many years. In fact, her youngest son and my youngest daughter, which now are in their mid-20s and almost early 30s, used to hang out here at Moundville and became good friends. But Miss Mary T is one of the finest potters. She does great pottery work, and she does it the old traditional way. So when you look at what she's going to do on this video, you're going to be seeing something that's been done for quite a long time, 1,000 years or more. And so if you come to Moundville and you come to the museum and you look at some of the pottery here at Moundville at the museum, you're going to see some of the pottery that she's done, and you're going to see some of the original pottery and see how well she does her pottery. So at this moment, I want to introduce you to Miss Mary T, and you're going to see some beautiful pottery, and you're going to meet a nice, wonderful lady too. So thank you again, and I hope you enjoy it.
The view of the table is showing you some styles of pottery, some tools, hand stamps and paddles, different clays I'm using, and some of the finished products of pottery. Pottery in America is, they say, about 5,000 years old, and it probably could be older, we won't know. But there's so many different forms of pottery from the southeast all across the United States. But a lot of the old pottery across the U.S. has similarities. Some of the clay has a lot of mica, some has a lot of iron, some has different contents, and depending on where you are geographically, you'll see those different contents. Let me say, my name is Mary T. Newman. I have been making pottery since, oh my goodness, about 99. I started out throwing on a wheel, but fell in love with coiling aspect the more I taught in the Native American world. So I'm hoping you'll enjoy this class. I'd like to draw attention to my new paddles that Larry Bean made, a husband of Tammy Bean, a well-known potter, and he is really great at his carvings. He retired from the park system and is really an artist in his own right. And so I wanted to share with you today some of my basics of what I do when I teach. If you look at my table closer, you'll see that some of the stamps, a hand stamp reflects some of the carvings that you would see on the old pottery that could be used for small close work versus a large paddle. Some of the things you find in nature that make great designs, like this is a brick that my son found in a creek, but it makes a great design on clay. And so you can tell that those old designs, someone today would be trying to figure out what made that design. You could have yellow ochre, or you could have different colors of paints that were used. The texture of corn cob on clay is very common, and interestingly, there are so many different kinds of corn cob, especially the old cobs versus the new corn cobs today of the corn. Then you can have a carved stamp, which is really effective. Coral from the ocean if you were in Florida. If you were someone who wasn't out in nature and you said, I don't have any of this, you could go to the store and find your own impressions, or go out and find a fern or a leaf. So you can have those things. If you want to recycle, crazy as it seems, the old-fashioned hair roller from the 40s, 50s, 60s makes a great design on clay. And if you press it or if you roll it. I'm going to bury this one day and see if the archaeologists can figure out what made that. So when we have different tools that go from clay stamps or wooden, we have the texture of the pine needle, or we have the texture of the nuts. We have the texture of the different bones. Here I have a collection of different bones I use when I'm carving or shaping. You can have something from the store, which is simply the ring for a napkin holder, which makes a great impression on clay. And then you can make things large or small. You can make a bead, a clay marble, or a cooking vessel. Gourds were used in the beginning to store herbs, foods, etc., water dipper. And so a gourd would also be a form to start a pot over, which I've used a lot. A lot of the water vessels that people see in the books were in the shape of a gourd. And then you have your, what I would call my models for when I want, someone would say, I want to make a duck or a bird or a turtle. So, and then you have your models that you can look at or study. And they can be all different shapes or sizes. And so when we look at large and small, we have larger or we have small. And when I start to work, the main thing I have to do is have water and clay. And this board I have has had this canvas on there for at least 20 years. And I'm sitting outside, which is great. And it has to be damp so that I can make my coils. I have started a vessel here by keeping it in a bowl that will hold the shape while I'm working. And this clay is dug in Georgia. It's very common for potters to use today. It's very, very strong. It's full of iron and mica and sand naturally, and you don't have to add anything to it. This fire is in a little bit deeper pit than I usually have because it's a bigger pot that's going to be in the middle of the fire. So what this fire is doing right now is drying out the ground, making sure there's no moisture. I've checked for any hidden rock. And as the fire begins to make a bed of coals over a period of time, and it has to be a large bed of coals, because as you rake all your coals back and the heat begins to drop, you have to keep your fire built up so that it's an even temperature. And behind the coals I'll be adding sticks of wood in order to keep the temperature up and to drive the tempering of the clay up. I primarily use oak and hickory, good hardwood that builds up a good bed of coals. That keeps the temperature even and steady. The clay in this big pot is full of iron and mica, which will be cooking like a cast iron skillet when it's done. Once you fire pottery, any vessel in a fire, you can go back and put it by the fire in the fire to cook any of your food that you want to cook. I don't use any pine. It has some pitch on it that's not good, and I don't like the resin that burns off of it. And then it pops all the time, drives me crazy. This fire's been going about an hour and a half. It's burning down in the middle. I'll start to build it back up so I can get a good bed of coals. I'll probably give it about 2 more hours. The bed of coals needs to be sometimes a foot deep, because as you rake it back, depending upon how big your fire ring is, your heat will drop quickly. If you're having a very small fire, that's not too bad. Large fire with a lot of pots or bigger pots, you need a good foot or a little bit more deep of coals to rake back. When you rake back the coals, the hot ground that you'll put the pots on in the middle will drive the heat up tremendously through the clay body. This is akin to low, medium, and high on an electric kiln, where you're making sure there's no moisture left. The tempering of the clay with the heat sets the clay body even more. With wood, you have to learn what kind of woods, how hot they burn, and what kind of coals they'll make. Some woods do not make good fires, and I would never use them. They just burn away. This is about an hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours into the fire, that I'm building up the bed of coals. This has been drying out the ground. That's very important if you've had any rain, because if the ground heats up with steam, that's detrimental to your pottery. It will absorb the moisture back. and defeat the purpose. This large pot over here, which holds about 3 gallons, 2.5, 3 gallons, is heating up and absorbing the heat from the fire, even though it will not be in the fire for quite a while. As this wood burns and begins to heat up the surrounding pots, and the pots absorb the heat from the sun, the heat from the fire, they will start to be tempered to the heat. I don't turn my pottery very much, but particularly a large piece of pottery, a large vessel, I would turn it a little bit so that it evenly absorbs the heat. This is a really, really hot fire. I've pulled back the back logs that were surrounding the fire, and I'm getting ready to rake the coals. So I've raked back the coals. The inside of the pit is very, very hot, and I'm letting the clay adjust to the heat from the surface of the ground and the surrounding fire. I never push any fire toward it until I call it. I push 3 times. So I've placed a small assortment of pots around the great big pot. These will sit here at least 30 minutes before I attempt to push any coals or ash toward the clay pots. I will begin to layer the back side of the burning logs with wood so that the temperature does not drop. If you notice, I've begun a row behind the burning logs that they'll start to burn as they catch. That will drive the temperature up also. Notice how the heat and the smoke is darkening the surface. I have just now used a garden hoe and pushed the ashes and coals closer to the clay vessels. You'll notice the flame, and I make sure that when that initial flame comes out, that it will not reach the clay pots right away. They are still not tempered enough to take that direct shot. You'll notice how much more carbon is soaking into the walls of the pots. The fire is increasing. I have pushed the coal and ashes down for the 2nd time. And as the wood starts to catch fire, I will start to rearrange it so that the heat continues to build. I've added 2 more layers of logs around the fire, driving up the heat. The sun is set. The pit fire is fully inflamed, wood all around the pots. I'm filming this in October, and the night temperature is going to drop, so I will cover this fire in a big arc with tin just to hold the heat in, not for any other reason.